The moment is here, you can stop your search. It's Comics by Perch.
Hey everybody, this is Perch. I'm going to kind of combine two topics in one, because why not? Save time, get through more mail. So two quick mails, and you'll see that really it's about kind of a schism or a war between two factions. And oh, wait a minute, what is he going to talk about? No, it's the primary mail I'm talking about is a question about Marvel versus DC, or specifically fans of Marvel versus fans of DC. I also got a lot of mail. There's this video I've touched on a couple times, but it got a lot of commentary. Now, in fairness, some online message boards talked about it. Somebody live streamed and sniped it, and there's a lot of people taking it highly out of context. But that is what they do. You need good fuel for that culture war, and sometimes I provide the wood that people like to light on fire. I'm providing the wood. I mean, if you're a longtime listener to the show, a lot of wood. Anyway, so let me read the more the smaller mail first, and we'll get to the bigger ones. Smaller mail goes, "Hey Perch, I'm curious if anyone else has had this reaction, so feel free to read this on your show. When I listened to your video about why I'm at war, what? Hang on. I listened to your video, why I'm at war with comics. Was that what the video was named as? I don't know, something close to it anyway. And I read the comments on your video. I walked away feeling sympathetic and actually closer to people like Heather Antos. I'm sure that wasn't the intent of either your video. My video was neither here nor there. Neither the intent of your video or the comments that were made on it. But listening to grown adults, presumably grown men, tough men, talk about how Heather needs to be starved, drug out of the industry, and die, just made me feel sympathetic to her. Even though, from a comic book perspective, hang on, I'm messing this up. Even though from a comic book perspective, I don't like her work, find her obnoxious, and don't care for what she does. I think she's a troublemaker, but somehow seeing all this outrage against her makes her a more sympathetic character. She's a human being, not whatever. Makes her a more sympathetic character. Do any of your other listeners have the same impression? I don't know. Do you? You tell me in the comments below, but there is a common human nature thing that there's a name for it. There's like a condition name for it, that if you go really hard at something, or someone rather, the person you're going hard at, even if they're quote unquote not a likable person, they get more likable, because the kind of the feeling of dogpiling onto a person, actually, it doesn't when there's a lot of dogpiling, it tends to add sympathy to the target versus gain a bigger crowd. And so I can see that. I don't know. Again, curious what people in the comments say, but whenever there's a really aggressive turn on a lot of videos, a lot of comments, whenever there's a really hard moment and against somebody, I always get mail. Again, not from people in comics, but fans. People like, okay, people lost their mind. Like there's just, I don't know. I don't know what it is. Anyway, but let's get to so curious. But that talks about kind of the dynamic between two groups a little bit. But this is a more interesting mail. It says, here we go. It says, "Hey, Perchington," and thank you for the name. I appreciate you. I appreciate you, as they say in Texas. Hey, Perchington. I am curious, from your time in a store, if you ever saw arguments between Marvel fans and DC fans grow out of control, like real anger, people getting really frustrated with each other, or threats of violence. Threats of fight. Anyway, I always find this behavior weird between Marvel and DC fans, because at the end of the day, they're all just comics, and a lot of creators will slip between both companies, or even write for both companies at once. Chip Zdarsky is currently writing Daredevil, for a few more issues anyway, and Batman, and the style of those comics is very much the same. So I don't understand how you could hate DC and love Marvel or vice versa, when the stories and the themes are for all purposes identical? I'm curious what you think about this, and if the war between Marvel and DC fans is really a thing. Thank you for all you do. Okay, I get very uncomfortable reading the praise at the end. I usually just skip it. Anyway, thank you for listening. And that's the end of the video. No, so it is. So first off, I don't, I you know, I no, I would watch people get really heated from a pure Marvel versus DC argument. Not really. You know, but usually it was more along the lines of this creator's good, this creator sucks, kind of thing. And not culture war good or sucks, but style, ability. I remember people getting very heated about Michael Mignola, like whether he was good or not, and that was a battle of whether his stuff looked good or not. But in general, I don't think, first of all, I don't think it's that big. Second, I think the arguments around Marvel and DC, they tended to be more about characters, and I like this character versus the company. Marvel more than DC would like to really stoke up a lot of, we're battling our competition, but most readers didn't really go for that. It felt like a joke or a kind of a sideshow, or not anything anybody was really being serious about. It just kind of felt, obnoxious to some extent. And it was usually about the characters, and usually it was like, I like the more kind of slightly fantasy world of DC. I like the more world outside your window style of Marvel. That tended to be how the battles were drawn and where things would happen. But it varied. I think that in general, once somebody got hooked on something, they tended to defend the company behind it. So if people got hooked on X-Men, then they were into Marvel, and so they'd kind of half-heartedly defend Marvel. But really, it was they were talking about the X-Men as the thing they liked, or the Justice League, or I really like Batman, and I don't really like the attempts of Marvel to give us a Batman analog. There'd be arguments of like, oh, so we're supposed to like Moon Knight? Okay. Kind of that kind of thing. And that tended to be how a lot of the discussion went. It was really around characters. Every now and then you'd see somebody who was like a Marvel zombie, a DC loyalist. You'd see people like that. But generally speaking, it was fairly benign. And again, in terms of getting heated, not really. Most people, have at least some sense of, touch grass in their head that they're not going to get into a fist fight over, a company, a corporation. The other thing is, keep in mind that, particularly in my fondest times, when I was actually more behind the counter, more really talking to people, versus owning the shop, it'd still go in, but on a more regular day-to-day basis in the 90s when I was engaging a lot more. The people coming in to buy comics in the 90s were, happily Gen X, and Gen X, were pretty anti-corporation. So it would be weird to have an argument where somebody was giving a really deep-throated support to, Marvel. That didn't align with a lot of people coming to buy comics. You would be very supportive of the characters or the creators, but the idea of like, I'm going to bat for a corporation, it's just that it's gross. There's just a natural built-in against it. I think that one thing that used to be better, I watched this trend kind of evaporate around 2005 or so. There was something in my head, and I have no evidence for this. So if Joe Quesada, if you happen to be listening to this one, reach out. We need to get back in touch. But right around his era, I noticed that the walls between, because if you looked at the 90s, there were a lot of Marvel customers who come into a shop who would buy all Marvel and nothing but Marvel. And it's like, it's not like they had a dislike of DC. They just never tried it. They didn't even want to. But when Joe Quesada came in and kind of did the Marvel Knight stuff, and then, in the years that followed, I watched that just slowly evaporate. Now, to be clear, I don't think he did it. I don't think he was responsible for it, but it was right around that era. And I'd love to talk to people who are, it had some editorial control in charge around that era, because it does feel like something changed around that time frame. And you stopped seeing so much of the only customers would buy like 40 Marvel titles a month and nothing else, or 40 DC titles. And suddenly you started seeing a lot more mix up. Not suddenly. It grew over time. I'd say between 2000 and 2008, kind of right in that zone. You just saw this tilt, and I'd love to understand kind of why that happened, but it seemed to break down. I'd be honest. I chat with people. I don't think I've heard or seen a true kind of Marvel versus DC, which is better, a really kind of impassioned fight in a long, long time. You hear things like Marvel has better creators, DC has better creators, but just a true like loyalist, two heads butting. I haven't seen it forever, but have you? So let me know in the comments below if you have any theories on any of this stuff. Have you still seen these fights? I think it's a thing of the past. I think it's become that. So let me know what you see. And thanks for listening.
Or so the Germans would have us believe.